taking the time to join us, register, join us, very much appreciated. It's webinar 10 in our series, and we're going to have a few of them coming up over the next few months, and I'll come back to that. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. If my computer will let me share my screen.
Correct.
Oh. There we go. So you should all see my screen now. So to start with is a bit of housekeeping. So please, microphone on mute, camera off, just to help everybody. Just to let you know, our session will be recorded and it'll be all posted on our microsite. So if you're missing anything, then the video and the slides will be posted on the microsite. So what's our agenda today? So I'm pleased to say that we'll be joined by Samantha Jamieson from Diamond Power and looking at how to get started. And that's what we'll start with, and over at that point to Samantha. And we'll have a question and answer session between the two, because I'm sure you'll have some queries and questions for Samantha. And then we move on to the Scottish Engineering Roadmap. It's all about the roadmap, this series, and it's about building a smart roadmap. So we looked at the methodology we used and how we go from concept to implementation. That's something we talked about in the previous webinars. And then we look at our progress to date. So as I said, it's a great pleasure that for the first of those new webinar, we are joined by Samantha Jamieson, the EHS officer from Diamond Power. For those of you that don't know much about, for those of you that don't know much about Diamond Power, it is part of the Babcock Wilcox group, and they lead the industry in providing advanced boiler cleaning technology and solutions. So technologies and solutions is designed to remove deposit in boilers and therefore improve boiler efficiency. If you improve boiler efficiency, you decrease energy usage. If you decrease energy usage, you improve your emissions. So that's where the strong link is with net zero. And they've got a lot of experience. They've got over a century of experience in boiler cleaning, and they've got plant owners around the world that just come and approach them to design those technology using innovative soot blowers, using intelligent controls and monitoring systems, reliable aftermarket service. So that's what Diamond Power does, and that's where the interest is and the connection is. So on that, I will pass over to Samantha to present their journey. And Samantha, I think let me know when you want me to move on to the next slides, and I will.
Okay, good morning everyone, and thank you Eric for your introduction, and also thank you for giving me the opportunity to share B&W Diamond Power's experience so far on our journey to net zero. Just to follow on then from what Eric was saying in the introduction there, I thought it would be worth giving a quick insight into some of the operations that we carry out at our site here in Dumbarton. So we have a CNC machine shop. We have welding operations, we have mechanical fitters, we build electrical control systems, we do the spray painting operations, and we have sort of woodworking and joiners for building the packaging, the crate manufacture. And we also have the sort of usual office support functions as well. So quite a range of activities going on here in Dumbarton. So Eric, if you could move to the next slide, please. So I'll talk a wee bit about how we started. So our journey began in April 21 when Scottish Engineering invited us to attend their series of webinars that were delivered by Eric, starting with the path to net zero. This was great timing as Glasgow was preparing to host the COP26 event later in the year, and it was never off the news. So we were keen to understand more about the climate emergency and the plans that were being discussed globally to improve the situation. The information that Eric shared in his webinars really opened our eyes to the bigger picture in terms of the Scottish Government's ambition to reach net zero by 2045, as Eric talked us through their climate change plan and route maps throughout the webinar series. To be honest, we did feel quite overwhelmed by it all, and we did struggle to see how we, as a small to medium-sized business in Dumbarton, could possibly make a difference. At this point, it felt like we had a huge task ahead of us to get ready for net zero, and we had no idea how we were going to tackle it. After spending what felt like hours and hours going round in circles trying to figure out where to start and what to do, I then had a light bulb moment when I realised that we didn't actually need to start from scratch at all, as we already had some things in place because of our ISO 14001 accreditation that would help us to get started on our journey to net zero. Next slide, please, Eric. So I found that the easiest way to clearly identify what our current situation is at the moment, i.e. what we were already doing and what still had to be done, was to do a SWOT analysis. First of all, I started looking at our strengths. It was becoming more apparent that we were already doing some things that would help us to get started. In May 21, B&W announced the launch of their Climate Bright decarbonisation technologies, which captures CO2 while producing hydrogen and can be used for a wide range of industries to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. So we were off to a reasonably good start, and it was good to see that B&W as a corporation are leading the way with this technology to help reduce emissions on a global scale. We have a robust 14001 environmental management system, which includes a detailed environmental aspects and impacts risk assessment, where we had already identified electricity as our highest environmental impact based on consumption. So we were already aware that we had to work towards reducing our electricity usage. However, we had not fully considered in detail what the impact of the greenhouse gas emissions being released were having on the environment. So we identified an opportunity to look at the emissions that were being generated by our operations in more detail. We already had an air emissions inventory in place, but over the last few months, this has been developing into more of a risk assessment of all our operations to help us assess how efficient our existing equipment is and the processes are to identify what improvements could be made to reduce our emissions. So we've looked at our existing equipment and we ask ourselves, are we using it effectively, or could it be used differently to maximise productivity? Or does it need to be upgraded to something that could produce more in less time? For example, our industrial engineer has been introducing offline programming for our CNC machines so that the machine operators can actually spend more time making things. We're also looking at the processes that we have in place and how effective they are. Are there any activities that are unnecessary or add little to no value? And if so, can they be removed? For example, are we using time, electricity, and resources to print out documentation that is not required by anyone, but it's just something that we have always done in the past? And we're also looking to see if we are providing accurate information and instruction so that the work is done right first time. Or are there areas that we need to focus on to cleanse the data so that we are not wasting time and energy on rework activities? So for example, one of the things that we're looking at are making sure that drawings that are issued to the shop floor are accurate. So at this point, we want to make sure that while we are heating, lighting and powering our plant, that we are getting the most productivity so as not to waste energy on unnecessary tasks. Another process that we already had in place was recording and monitoring our utilities usage. So this information was readily available for calculating our carbon footprint. Using the data from our 2021 records, we used the Carbon Trust carbon footprint calculator to identify our baseline. The calculator generated a report which told us our carbon footprint was 482.5 tonnes of CO2 equivalent. And it also had information on how much we could pay to offset our carbon emissions for 2021, which I think was just under £4,500. And it provided suggestions on how we could reduce our carbon footprint in-house. We found this tool was very quick and easy to use, and that the report was simple to follow. Noah touched on equipment just there, but another thing worth mentioning on this is that we already had a planned maintenance programme in place to ensure that our equipment is well maintained and it runs as efficiently as it possibly can, which can be a challenge at times. In October 21, I issued our annual EHS newsletter, which included an advert for recruiting green team members internally. My initial thoughts were that the green team would continually evolve and members would change as projects were completed and new ones were started. I was looking for people who wanted to help raise awareness, share ideas and suggestions, and also to give them the opportunity to celebrate their successes with their colleagues. I did get a few willing volunteers from the shop floor, and we held a few meetings at the end of last year. Although the team were very enthusiastic and willing to participate, we quickly found that without investment and support from top management, that there was very little that they could do at this point to make a huge difference, which was a little bit disappointing for us all. Probably one of the easiest things that we had in place was getting a certificate from our electricity provider to say that 100% of electricity supplied to our site is renewable, backed by certificates of renewable energy guarantees of origin, and that the emission factor is compliant with Scope 2 of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So for us, that was Scope 2 taken care of without too much hassle. And of course, it goes without saying that we already had the support from Scottish Engineering to help us on our journey as well, between attending Eric's Net Zero webinars and the one-to-one sessions with Eric, and also the 6 monthly site visits from our EHS consultant. I then had a look at our weaknesses to identify the gaps and the challenges that were becoming more apparent, which included attitudes. Unfortunately, some people don't seem to think that they will be affected by net zero, or it doesn't matter to them, or they will be retired and they won't be here by then, so they don't need to worry about it. And others just think it's another tick box exercise. People don't always understand the implications or realise that although it may not directly affect them at the minute, that it will certainly impact future generations. So it will be a real challenge to try and change these mindsets and to get the buy-in that's needed for positive change. We have fairly limited resource. We're all busy with our day-to-day workloads to make time for changes or to take on new tasks. Admittedly, I too have found it difficult to make time. No matter how much you plan, something else always seems to come up, and unfortunately, the net zero work tends to be the easiest thing to get pushed aside sometimes. And then it's quite difficult to pick it back up and get yourself motivated again. A lack of management commitment comes as a result of the limited resource and the attitude challenges that I've just mentioned. Although we have added our commitment to reduce our carbon footprint as an objective to our IMS policy, the biggest challenge is getting the buy-in that is needed from top management to commit to net zero and really lead the way in making the improvements and to provide the necessary resource that will be required to help us on our journey to net zero. Also have a lot of aged equipment and a fairly old facility, which we do maintain to the best of our ability, but there is a need for investment to upgrade some areas that would really help to reduce our energy usage and in turn the emissions. However, we do not have the money available to make upgrades at the moment. There is currently no budget locally at Diamond Power or at corporate level for making net zero related improvements. Any upgrades to equipment or the facility would need to be CapEx, and of course, when there is little to no return on investment, it will be a challenge to get approval. We do hope that net zero could actually be used to our advantage to strengthen our case to get the approval for the investments that are needed. We have also found that we're not eligible for funding from the likes of Zero Waste Scotland, because although we operate as a small to medium business, we are part of a large corporation. So unfortunately, we cannot benefit from any funding. So for example, things like replacing fluorescent lighting with LED lights has been and continues to be a gradual process for us, which happens as and when required, as we simply don't have the funds available to change it all in one go. And lastly, the supply chain management system is likely to be our biggest challenge in terms of the Scope 3 requirements. At this point, we don't fully understand the full extent of the requirements of the Scope 3 obligations or how we will tackle this. But what we do know is that, again, commitment from top management to provide the resource will be essential. So now that we understand what we're doing well and where our weaknesses are, we have uncovered endless opportunities to consider. However, I have tried to condense this and share the key opportunities that we will need to focus on. So as I've mentioned, management commitment. Top management will need to define the ambition for the company and be committed to developing the roadmap on how they are going to achieve our ambition. To do this, they will need to allocate time and resource and set smart objectives in order to achieve net zero. Top management will have to realise that this isn't just down to one person or one team to do it all, but the whole team is required to play their part, especially when we start looking at Scope 3, as I just mentioned before. We need to promote net zero internally. We need to look at ways to provide education and raise awareness to promote net zero if we want to change attitudes, and also to generate motivation to get people to want to make a difference. We want people to consider what legacy they want to leave behind for their colleagues, their families, or their friends. We've discussed with Eric the best methodology for us to follow, and we have identified ISO 14064 greenhouse gases as a standard that we want to use, with a view to gaining accredited verification in the future. We recognise that although we have a business continuity plan in place, we should update this to include the impacts of climate change and how our business would cope with these potential challenges, such as severe weather, transportation, or material issues. I mentioned before that we're developing our air emissions risk assessment, which will generate a whole load of opportunities or things that we certainly have to consider. Some of these actions will most likely appear on our roadmap once we have the commitment from management and hopefully the funds available where needed. And lastly, we need to understand more about Scope 3 and the implications for our site so that we can make a decision on our net zero boundary, i.e., how far do we want to go with this? This is not something that has even been considered as yet. However, we will have to look at it in more detail at some point in the future and will most likely appear on our roadmap as well. And the last part of our SWOT analysis looks at the threats that we face. This took us back to one of the questions from the early stages of Eric's webinars, where he talked about the why. And basically for us, it's because we not only want to make a difference to reduce the impact that our business has on the environment and climate change, but we also want to avoid the associated risks and consequences if we don't do anything about it and we just carry on as normal. So some of the main threats to us are losing customers, which we obviously don't want to do. But there could come a time where our customers simply don't want or aren't able to do business with us if we are not seen to be working towards net zero. Just like some of our customers would not be able to buy from us if we did not have 14001 certification. Then there are our competitors. If our competitors are seen to be doing more to reduce their carbon footprint, then we could again find ourselves losing business if we do not keep up with them, or even better, lead the way. Some of our employees are also taking more interest in how our company is impacting the environment and what sort of future they are leaving behind. It is also becoming more common for candidates at interview stage to ask what our company's ambitions are for a net zero future. So again, there is some competition to make people want to come and work for us, rather than go elsewhere to another company that is more proactive in making changes. Also, the threat of losing financial support is significant. We do not want to find ourselves in a position where finance becomes unavailable because we are not working to reduce our emissions. And lastly, the likelihood of taxes being introduced could impose additional financial expense to businesses who are not progressing towards net zero. So we want to get ahead as much as we can before it becomes forced upon us. So that really summarises our current situation. I appreciate this has probably been quite a lot of information to process, but using the SWOT analysis tool for our organisation has really helped us to see clearly where we are and where we need to be. And hopefully this might be useful to some of you to help get you started on your journey to net zero. Next slide, please, Eric. So I've talked about some of the challenges that we have faced or may face in the future, and some of the successes that we have had so far. And of course, there have been several lessons learned throughout our journey too. So I thought it would be better to finish by sharing some of the key lessons that we have learned, and perhaps share a few words of encouragement for you too. First of all, look at what you have already got in place. If you have 14001, then you will already have an environmental management system in place, and you probably just need to develop it a bit further and focus more on the emissions aspect, and then you can identify ways to make your processes that little bit better, or even remove the non-essential processes and activities where appropriate to help reduce your emissions. Use the tools that you're familiar with. In our case, the SWOT analysis tool has been used for other projects and featured in our management reviews previously. So this felt like the best option for us to use to begin with. Of course, there are other tools and methods available that may be better suited to your organisation or that you feel more comfortable using, but we certainly found the SWOT helpful to get us started on our journey to net zero. As frustrating as it is going round in circles, creating your spreadsheets and methods and whatever else you do and then undo, don't beat yourself up over it, as we have learned and accepted that that is simply part of the process. If you find yourself railroading in one direction, then think it's been absolutely pointless. Just park it, stick it in a file, and no doubt you'll come across it at a later date and be glad to find it again, because it was actually worthwhile in some way or another. And finally, and it's not always an easy thing to do, but accept help. We have had a few one-to-one calls with Eric where we were able to ask questions and share our progress, and Eric very promptly provided us with feedback and guidance. We also invited Eric to visit our facility a few weeks ago to help him understand our operations so that he could help us develop our processes accordingly. So I would strongly recommend that you accept Eric's offers of support where possible. So thank you again to Eric for giving us this opportunity to share our journey so far, and thank you all for taking the time to listen. If anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to ask.
Thank you very much, Sam. So have we got any question you can see coming
So
up?
I don't see any in the chat. If anybody's got any, stick them in. Sam, I've got one question for you. So I really like the SWOT analysis approach. Makes really good sense of chunking things down. Can I ask, when you were putting that together, who did you pull in to help you? Did you assemble a team, or was it more than just yourself who went through doing that?
To be honest, Paul, it was really myself. As I was going through what we had and creating new things, it just seemed to make sense to sort of, as you say, chunk up what we already had and what we needed to do. And for me, it was a good way of sharing that with the management team last year at Management Review.
That's excellent. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Any other questions? Feel free to stick your mic on and camera if you want. Chris. Oh yes. So Chris O'Brien has asked Sam, how many people are in the green team, and let me just and how often do they meet? So how have you structured the green team that you mentioned?
Okay, so we had 4 people from the shop floor, and we invited our previous HR manager as a management representative as well. So we had a monthly meeting where they did generate really good ideas, but what we found was that everything they were coming up with was going to require investment. So it was like insulating the paint booths, or replacing the windows, or upgrading boilers and things like that. So they were more sort of coming up with sort of expensive solutions that required investment. They did get tasked with carrying out an air leak survey in their areas. So although we get an air leak test done in the main system, they were asked to go out into their areas and check all their equipment and report any air leaks that they found. So there were some sort of small things that they could do, but the majority of the ideas generated did require investment.
Okay, thanks, Sam. I don't see any other questions just now, Eric, and I'm sure, hang on, it's just something coming from Fraser. Hi, morning, Fraser. So Fraser Miller asks, first of all, he pays a compliment, it was great. Interested to know if Diamond Power will look at scope 2 energy saving measures as well as using renewable energy certificates. So what's your comment on that? So I know you mentioned that you have moved to renewable energy certificates, but what about your energy saving measures?
Yes, so that is something that we will look into further. So using the 14,064 standard, we will have to spend more time looking at what else we need to do to achieve that.
Okay. Thanks, Sam. Okay, I think that's it for questions now. We can always take some more later if we need it. But Eric, with that, I'll hand back to you.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So we're going to look at the Scottish engineering roadmap and what philosophy or methodology we've used and the processes, and more importantly, where we are today and what we've learned on the journey so far, a journey which is not complete. So in terms of principle, is the first thing is about making it smart. And by smart, we mean specific, so that you need to define the what, measurables, that's the where and how much is achievable. So it's a who, and it's relevant. It's why you're doing it and how you're going to do it. And last but not least is time bound. Is have you got target times for those? And that's usually the most difficult thing. People can develop the specific and will say it being achievable, but most of the time the time bound piece is missing. So first thing is making smart. The second was about make it lean. And in here we're using the 5 W's and 2 H's tools, but to Sam's point earlier on, the SWOT is another one you can look at. And the SWOT analysis is another lean tool that may be valuable. We're approaching these with a view that by having the 5 W 2 H's, you should have a holistic understanding. And the way it works is, if you look at the what, it's about reducing emission. And can it be innovated? No. And that makes it specific. The why is to define the purpose. Why are you doing it? And you're doing it because of stakeholder value. So does it add value? Yes. And that makes it relevant. And that's what was mentioned by Sam about not losing customers and not losing to competitors. The where is defining the boundaries. So is it the best location? Yeah, and I make it measurable. So the location would be depending on your organization, would be dependent on your operations. So that's the two operational and organizational boundaries, and we'll come back to that. The when, the time bound, the roadmap. So is that roadmap smart? Is it time bound? Yes. And I give you the time bound, the when. The who is about the stakeholders. Do they have the steel, the one that delivers it? Yes, and that makes it achievable. If they don't, then that's where do you get them? How do you get them? That's what it's about, the skills. And then the how is about defining the process. And you look at standards, and is the methodology defined? So if you heard from Sam in Diamond Power, the idea of the methodology is ISO 14064. So that makes it measurable. And finally, the how much is the support, the financing. So the who is about the human resources. This is about the financial resources. It's about the funding. And again, that makes it achievable. So that's what we're looking at. The 5 W2H's, smart. And the last piece is make it simple. And we're looking at a smart roadmap. So we've developed a 7-step process. The first step is you define your vision and ambitions. That makes it specific because that does the what, and that makes it relevant because that does the why. Then you define your timing to make it time bound, and that's your base year and your end year, and that's your when. You look at the boundaries, and that makes it measurable, and that's the where. So that's your operational boundaries. Then you look at your methodology, and that's going to define, again, boundaries, making it measurable, the how, and that's your operational. So the first one is organizational, the second one is operational boundaries. Then you allocate the resources both human and financial, but human, so that's the who, and that makes it achievable. And you track your progress, that's how much, that's the finance side of things. And again, that makes it achievable. And finally, you look at compliance, verifying compliance, and that makes it relevant. And you share that information, you share that roadmap. The interest in here is the first 3 steps, all the standards converge. So it doesn't matter what methodology you're going to use, those 3 steps are going to be useful regardless. So the idea here is there is nothing stopping you getting onto the journey, and you can look at how you do the methodology at a later stage, but you should be able to start the journey now. The challenge is after this, then the standards diverge. So the way you measure the methodology, the resources, etc., will diverge. So at that point, you need to have hang your hat onto one of the standards. But there's nothing stopping you starting that journey and planning the roadmap and designing the roadmap. So those were the 3 principles: smart, lean, simple. So now, how do you go actually from the concept to the execution? How does that work in real life? It's fine to put it on paper, but how does it work? So if you think about step 1 and looking at now the Scottish engineering point of view, right? You define your vision. And what we see is that if you look at the chapter, the climate change plan for the chapters for the climate change plan for the Scottish Government, then I can refer you back to the webinar series we did on that. Scottish engineering is in a unique position in the sense that it has a wide range of members, and all those members have got an impact directly or indirectly on all of those 8 chapters. And that's why it's quite key. You know, even if you think about agriculture, if you think about land use, we still have members participate into those categories, into those chapters, so they've got a role to play. So we are in that unique position is we've got that network, and that's one of the main things. Now, what we drew from that is, what was our ambition? Well, our ambition is to do net zero to support the Scottish Government, because we are Scottish engineering. But there is a motivation, and the motivation is to support our members. And the way we are planning to do that is by removing the barriers that our members faces when they try to go onto that journey. And that's what you've just heard from Sam. And here, you know, you're looking at the same story across all SMEs about, you know, the challenge of barriers being the budget, the potential high cost, the low return on investment, you know, the difficulty to reduce that's the scope 3, reduce emission you don't control. And sometimes it could be hard to measure. That's a methodology. That could be difficult. Which one are you going to select? So that's what we are here for, helping our members to remove those barriers. So that's all what, and that's all why. So then when you look at step 2, set the base year and the target year, that's your when. So we are looking at the Scottish Government Climate Change Act of 2019, which makes it legal or a legal requirement for the Scottish Government for Scotland to be net zero by 2045, and they provide 2030 and 2040 as interim targets. So for that, we can look at in more detail the webinar about building a smart roadmap. But here you've got a view of what the Scottish Government roadmap looks like. So for Scottish engineering, what does that mean? I mean, base year 2019 and target year 2045. And as for consistency, one of the 5 principles of any standard is consistency. And 2045 is being consistent with Scottish Government. And 2019 is being consistent with how we operate today. So we've not picked up a base year where our mode of operation was significantly different from where we are today, because that would just be unrealistic. So we've chosen 2019 as our base year, 2045 as our target year. Step 3, you look at your boundaries, and as I mentioned, you've got your organizational boundaries, which is what you control, what business do you control, and you're part of a bigger group, and that sort of thing, financial and operational controls. And then you've got your operational boundaries, which are about the scope. So for Scottish Engineering, we've decided that our organizational boundary would be 100% of our operational control, and that means that we may be renting some of the space we've got. So we wouldn't have financial control over it, but we'd have operational control over it. So that's 100% operational control, that'd be ours. And then operational boundaries, we decided that we'll include scope 1 and scope 2, and we'll exclude scope 3, but we'll assess it. We need to assess it for its significance, its materiality. So that's what we decided to do for scope 3. Scope 4, then step 4, sorry, is where you look at your methodology, and there's a plethora of standards out there you can choose from. And again, I would refer you to one of the previous webinars on standards we did. But for us, we choose the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. Why did we choose the Greenhouse Gas Protocol? Because it has a global dimension, and a lot of our members are part of bigger groups, global groups, international groups. So it is important to look at a global dimension. It is the original standard to which all the other standards tend to refer to. So it's a good thing. And at the top of it is freely available. There's also tools which are available, and also guidance which are available. It's also consistency. Remember those 5 principles, between here we've got accuracy, but we're also looking at consistency. It's got the Kyoto Protocol about the greenhouse gases, which is the same than the Scottish Government. Scope 3 is optional, but should be assessed. So if you think about the Scope 3 I mentioned earlier on, or the operational boundaries, and it can be independently verified. So that's to avoid the greenwashing side of things and keeping arm's length. So that's who we decided to go for. 5. That's another one that Sam mentioned, is building a green team and allocating resources, both human and financial. So we're looking at the who, so we build a green team, and really you're trying to build a small team, which is what Sam's done, but you have a lot of forums, satellite for all the key stakeholders to speak out and put their input. So for Scottish Engineering, what does that mean? Scottish Engineering is a customer. It's also the client, but the stakeholders are our members, and that's quite important. Pardon me. The core resources will obviously be Scottish Engineering team. The project office would be E2B, which is myself. And the external suppliers are also going to be key stakeholders. And what is the project delivery team? So I will be leading that project, but we've got SPOR as a key sponsors, and it goes back to that concept Sam mentioned about getting management buy-in, and that's quite key. We've got a core team of 4 people, and I will be coordinating. So we've developed the green team. And finally, so try your progress. So that's a work in progress. In this case, we are looking at using the ocean matrix to track that, because it has that smart aspect to it all in one page, and it shows the link between everything. So you start with your long-term objective, where do you want to be, and that's your one. Let's make it specific. And to get there in, say, 5-10 years time, what do you need to do next year? And that makes it time bound, and that's your annual objective, your how far, your number 2, and you link the actions one with the others. And once you define that, what you want to do next year, the next is how you're going to do it. That's your number 3. So at that point, you make it relevant. And finally, how you're going to measure it, that's your how much, that's your KPI. And because this tool, which is another lean tool, it can be used for all sorts of things. but it makes it measurable. And finally, achievable is a who. You put someone in charge of a given action. So if you look at the right-hand side, that's what you see. You see the link through those dots between, what your long-term objectives are, what do you need to do next year, how you're going to do it, how much you're going to do it, and who's going to be in charge of it, and all on one page. So when that is not done, it's a work in progress for us. That's how we are planning to put it together. And then we may look at, pledge and independent verifications. So in this case, again, it's a work in progress. Independent verification will be by a UCAS accredited body for obvious reason. And here you are looking at ISO 1465 and 14966. But we may also be looking at pledges, and there's a plethora of pledges, and those are examples. So those are the 7-step applying to Scottish engineering. So that's how our roadmap looks like. We've taken 2019 our base year. We've got 2045 our target year. We'll be focusing on scope 1 and 2 originally, but we won't be ignoring scope 3 and then make it a big part of our carbon reduction plan at later years. We're also looking at strategizing, and I mean that do we implement circularity? What do we do in the way we operate, in the way we behave to maximize or minimize emission and maximize the productivity? But all along, and that's what we're doing today and what we've been doing for the past 12 months, is influence the industry, supporting our industry, our community, our members. So this is our roadmap. So where are we today? So define our ambitions. It's net zero by 2045 at the latest. So if we can do better, we will. We say our base year and target year, so it's 2019 to 2045. We've defined our methodology that will be using the greenhouse gas protocol. We've built a baseline, and I'll come back to that, which is 2019. Now we are developing our roadmap. So as you can see, we've developed our ambitions. I've showed you the roadmap. What we need to do now is look at developing the solutions to that ambition. How are we going to get there? So we know the what, but how? We need to track our progress. So we've got 2021, and I'll show you that, but we're going to do that on a yearly basis. And finally, we need to look at compliance. And for that compliance, then we still need to do some work on it. So, greenhouse gas protocol and the scopes 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1 is mandatory in green, are the one which we have impact, and red the one we don't. So for example, we don't generate energy or electricity, so that won't apply to us. But we do have company vehicles, and we potentially face fugitive emission from our systems. So that would be included. So, and as scope 1 is mandatory, scope 2 will be mandatory also, and it's about purchase electricity. Pardon me. Scope 3 upstream. So you can see that they all be accountable. We all need to look at them, except capital goods, because we don't capitalize goods. So they will be all accounted for. And downstream, you can see that none of them apply because we are not a financial institution. We don't run franchise, we don't lease facilities, but more importantly, we don't make, sell, and transport products. And that's why it is so important that we've got companies like Diamond Power joining us to share their experience, because we then realize that if we were just our experience, it would have a limited value to our members. So that's why we put in place that webinar series where we share ours as well as our members' experience. Pardon me. So that's our scope, and that's what's been included. Now, if I look at scope 1 and scope 2, initially, then you can see our baseline 2019. And for the sum of the two, we ended up at 40 ton of CO2 equivalent. And the tracker 2021, we ended up at 12 ton equivalent. And you can see scope 1 was 15 tons and scope 2 is 25 tons. fairly straightforward because those scopes are fairly simple and easy to measure. Scope 3 can be a different challenge. So scope 3, as I said, we are assessing it, and all the downstreams don't apply. So you've got those 7 categories downstream that are not applicable. Pardon me. And category 1 is the biggest one. Scope 3, category 1, purchase goods and services is the biggest one, and it's always the biggest one. So that can be the challenging, but we are looking at 66 ton as a base year and 69 ton in 2029. So as a total of scope 3, you've got 80 ton, 73 tons. By a total of scope 1, 2, and 3, we've moved from 120 ton in your base year to 85 tons in 2021. So if I put that in perspective, that's how you compare the two years, 2019 and 2021. There is 3 main contributors. Scope 1, mobile combustions, and that's what we're going to have to look at. Scope 2, purchase electricity, and we purchase electricity on 2 accounts. One for our own facilities, but also because we share a space, so that is accounted in here. And finally, in scope 3, purchase goods and services. That's the other big one. So that's the 3 main contributors we're going to look at. Looking at the tracker. So what you've got here is, in orange, you've got the Scottish Government roadmap, and in blue, you've got the more aggressive suggestions of the Scottish Engineering roadmap. And it isn't linear because things are not linear. But ultimately, what we're looking at is, as long as we can stay between the blue and the orange line, then we'll be arriving where we need to be in due time, which is net zero by 2045 at the latest. So like the Scottish Government, we've got a base year and we've got a target year, 2045. Like the Scottish Government, we've got interim targets of 2030 and 2040. And the good news is in 2021, then we were on target if we look at our tracker. Pardon me. Now, what we recognize is there is going to be a hangover from COVID and therefore working from home, that sort of things. And that may go back up in 2022. But as I said, as long as we can stay between those 2 lines, then we should be on target. And finally, there is a recognition that to be 0 emitters is unlikely to happen. So you have to think about at what point do you bring the emission trading scheme, the ETS. So we're suggesting maybe 2035. So where are we? Influence, as I said, that pillar for net zero program. Today, we've delivered 9 webinars, and we've reached 182 organizations and 570 individuals, which is quite interesting. And as Sam mentioned, we've had several 1-to-1, 145 dates. So it's over, 10 a month type thing. And finally, we've built a library of over 300 reports in which we go and tap to support our members. So we've got a substantial list of information. Today, it was about a webinar about getting started, and I've got to thank Samantha and Diamond Power for stepping in there, because that proves to be very valuable, and I've got to apologize because it was a very last minute request, but I appreciate much, and I hope you learn and you got inspired by Samantha presented. What we're doing next, we're going to keep working on that, what I said, sharing our webinars. And the next series would be about developing a roadmap. And in August, we're planning, after the school holidays and the holiday period, welcoming Ian McLachlan and Agreco. And in September, we'll be welcoming Rebecca Rainbow and Texo. So that's the plan. So what's the summary of all this? We're here to help, and we can help. So to Sam's point, no, please do reach out, and we'll be more than happy to help. So that will be the end of my presentation. As always, open the floor for any questions, and do not hesitate to reach out if we can help you out.
Okay, thanks, Eric. So there's no questions in chat just now. We're not a big group, so anybody who wants to, please feel free to come off mute, stick your camera on if you wish, and ask away. And I should say at this point, we're in good shape for giving you some time back in your day, because I know we scheduled this till 10 o'clock. I will put one hand up, and Fraser Miller first. So we'll go to Fraser Miller first, and David, I can see you after that, and we'll come to you after that. Fraser?
Hi there, thanks very much. Yeah, I think my question is quite similar to David's. I was wondering why gas emissions are zero, and how the buildings that Scottish Engineering operates in, how are they heated if gas emissions are at zero? I'd be quite keen to know that.
Shall I take that one, Eric?
If you want it.
So by great good luck, we have an air source heat pump, which is it's a air source heat pump which also acts as an air conditioner in summer, so it has that four-way diverter valve. So our heating and any cooling that we require are entirely come from electricity. We don't have any gas usage in the building at all.
Okay, so the electricity figure includes that as well?
It does.
All right, okay. Oh, that's good to know, thanks.
It does, and you can see, well, you saw in Eric's slide how much that went down over in 2021 as a result of a very different working pattern and people not being in the office nearly as much as they were in 2019.
Yeah, so one more question then, sorry, I'll give someone else the floor. Are you going to be accounting for home working, or is that something that's maybe going to come later, or is that not part of the emissions scope?
So home working isn't part of any other standards, and I think the reason for it is it's unclear on two accounts. Is like it's too dependent on how people behave at home, and the jury is still out there about is it more or less emitting by working from home, and intuitively it should be less. But one of the big difference, for example, seems to be that if you work from home and heat only the room you work in, then you'll be better off working from home because you're getting on the commuting and that sort of things. But if you work from home and heat your house the way you do during the week and the weekend in the evening, then it's arguable if you're emitting less by working from home than working in the office. You can imagine in the office, you've got an open plan, 10 people in the same room, that sort of things. So because of all those uncertainties, then I don't think working from home, or I know working from home is not part of any other standards. So it's a gain to the business by people working from home. Is it a gain for the world? That's another question.
Is that okay, Fraser?
Yeah, I think so. There is a figure you can use from Scottish Government for working from home if you felt so inclined. But yeah, it's down to individual organisations whether or not they want to do that. But the process of actually calculating home working emissions can be pretty tough. So yeah, no, I understand that. Thank you.
Yeah. There is a lot of research papers have been published, and there was a review paper, and that's what they're coming to. I would say working from home most of the time, or in most of the papers, is an improvement. But then they just show the level of uncertainty, which is one of the principles. I talked about 5 principles earlier on, and one of them is uncertainty. So yeah, but you're right. There is a way to do it.
Okay. So, David, I saw your hand went down because it looks like we answered your question. Hope that's the case. Oh, please, yeah, let's come to you.
No, thanks, guys. Half answered it in that it's why it's not showing anywhere. But where would it be if you had a gas boiler? It doesn't seem to be as clear. So if you did have a gas consumption, where would you record that?
So your gas consumption will go into your scope 1 stationary combustion. Okay. So and then you could use like what we've used, which is the DFRAT number. But that's where you would see it coming in. And to Paul's point, there is no gas usage here. That's where you've got an NA. But if you had a gas boiler, then it wouldn't be any.
As I suppose a supplementary question. So you've got gas consumption, which is a purchased utility in scope 1, and you've got electricity, which is purchased as a utility in scope 2. Has that got any material effect that they're in different places? Because to me, they're the same thing.
So I think the idea about stationary combustion scope 1 gas is there's very little biogas out there. So whereas electricity, purchase electricity, you can look at, so we're using location-based, but you could look at what's called market-based, which is your contract. And then in that contract, you could have it, like Sam explained, about 100% certified renewable. So you can't really get 100% certified gas. There is biogas, so it's a bit tricky, but that's the reason why I think they split it. They split it because one is, I would say, fairly straightforward, electricity, and one isn't, which is gas.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. Findlay, Beveridge asked a question in chat. Findlay, you're welcome to ask a question out loud. If not, I'll go ahead and read it out.
Yeah, okay. So it's just on our business is people, and if you're in a situation where you have people who are working from home or even working in your facility, does this initiative allow you to capture any personal employee improvements that they've made to their own greenhouse gas emissions? You know, if they're engaged with the whole idea and they decide to seek out, green suppliers of whatever, is there scope to include those improvements within the business improvements overall, or is it strictly business focused in terms of the facility and activities?
So if you're measuring as a tonnage of emission, then none of those, being scope 1, 2, or even scope 3, if you want, except the commuting, have a direct impact on your business emission. However, there's a big piece of it which is about how do you influence your community. So it's not just about your business. The next step, or one of the key pillars in this, is going to be how you influence your employee to behave better. So in terms of measuring their own emission, then there's plenty of tools out there that you can go as an individual and measure your own emissions. And then as a business, your role is about how do you help them getting there. So if I look at, there may be active travel, you may want people to walk, cycle to work, that sort of thing. The Scottish Government refer to what's called the 20 minutes neighbourhood. So there are things, but the only direct impact in your business will be on employee commuting. That's going to be the direct impact. The other direct impact will be potentially on business travel of your employees. So those are, if you do a lot of what we are doing, which is like Teams meetings and Zoom meetings and that sort of things. So that's what it is. But you're trying to educate and encourage your your employees to behave green.
So is that okay? So obviously you could try and influence them and have them engaged in it, but any improvements that they make in their personal situation on the back of the business's drive towards this, you can't capture that as an improvement in the business overall, other than the commuting element.
So you can't, as a as a standard like this, as a scope 1, 2, and 3 in the greenhouse gas protocol, for example. But you can, when you make your statement, when you share your analysis, when you share your information, I would say almost as a marketing point of view, as a PR point of view, then that's where you would show what you've done. It's not just about meeting a standards or requirements. It's about changing behaviour.
Okay, thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Findlay. Eric, Fraser Miller has asked a question. How do we capture commuting data, or how do you capture commuting data, and acknowledging that it's an area businesses tend to struggle with?
So the way we're looking at is we are a small group of people, so we know how everybody commutes to work. So you could do a survey, but you could easily start by doing, so let's say everybody commute by cars because of where we are located, and we've got 40 employees and the average is 15 miles from the plant. Then you get up with a number. The first thing to do is really to get a series of numbers to get a feel. So how is that commuting in relation to your electricity, for example, in relation to your own emissions? And then if that becomes material, that's where you want to look at it. So I would say that's where when you want to go into the details of it, then you may want to run a survey: who's commuting by bus, who's commuting by train, who's cycling to work, who's commuting by cars. So that unfortunately you would need to go one by one and get a survey done.
Can I add, Fraser, that I totally agree with you. It's an area that business can struggle with. Not for commuting, but one of the things that we saw when we started as a team was that for business travel, where it's not taking the car, so the car's pretty straightforward. You've got mileage and you can calculate on that basis. But in terms of expenses, where we took the train or the bus or the flight or the taxi, we were good at capturing the value of the expense, but not the method. So we had that at one point, but in the way we captured it, we were just capturing the cost, and of course that then you have to then assume that it's the worst case, because you don't have a reliable data. So I think it's one of those examples, a bit of a trivial example, but it's one of those things that you only learn once you start looking, and then you say, actually, we need to change the way we capture this if we want to be accurate on that going forward. And I'm sure that's our example, but for a lot of businesses, I'm sure that'll be the case. Is once you start looking at the way you measure it, you look and say, we need to capture this a bit more accurately if we want to know what it is going forward. I don't see any other questions, Eric, and
Paul, just one more from me, if that's okay.
Of course, sorry, yeah, thanks.
Thanks. It's very similar to what you're saying. As I'm thinking about purchased goods and services, which is clearly the biggest number you've got. There seem to be two ways of doing it. You either tally up the value of what you're buying and apportion a carbon footprint per pound to that, or the other thing we've looked at is you tally up the weight of what you're buying and what the material is. Is it a chunk of metal? Is it a packet of paper? What would your advice be? We basically said, this looks a bit complicated, we'll do it next year, and did nothing this year because we didn't want to start doing it the wrong way. But what would you do? Because you're obviously doing something. How are you tallying up category 1, scope 3?
Okay, so it is indeed the most difficult way to do it. There is one of the easiest way, and the easiest between, I'm not sure how easy it is, but one of the way to do it is what we have done is use what's called table 13 from the British government. And what that gives you is, it gives you, if you want, a correlation or a number from pound spent to kilogram of CO2 emitted, or CO2 equivalent in that case. So that's what we've used. However, that's where there is two challenges. The first one is secondary data, so it's averages across the UK. And the second thing, sorry, is that it's stopped in 2011, Table 13, so it's kind of a bit outdated. But it gave us a number again. You know, it's about giving that, even if we were going to look at, you know, different set of numbers, updated numbers, etc., it's very much likely that that will still be one of our top contributors. Now, how you go about getting primary data is going back to your supplier and asking your supplier to provide you the information. Because the concept behind all these is that the reason, or the concept behind Scope 3 is how do you influence your supplier, your community to become net zero. And that's where, you know, there is if you go to one of the previous webinars, I've mentioned the multinational companies who are going to teach all those suppliers of theirs that don't have a carbon reduction plan, that sort of thing. So that's where you're showing sort of procurement notice. So what you're looking at is influencing your supply chain. So you need to go back to your supplier, and then you start maybe by your top 5 and see where you go. And then you go and tackle the next 5. And so, but that's the only way you're going to actually get primary data. In the meantime, we're using secondary data, but that just shows the materiality. When I talked about commuting earlier on, that's what it was about. You know, is it material or not? Does that answer your question?
Well, always prompts another question. A good answer. So,
Well, remember, David, that
okay, 1-to-1.
yeah,
and then
yeah, we'd love to do that with you. We'd be glad to help sit down.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
when I say we, I mean Eric, of course.
It's
Help you.
It's very comforting that it's not easy. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I don't see any other questions, Eric, so maybe hand back to you to close up.
Okay, so, well, I would just like to close by thanking everybody for taking the time this morning to join us. Thanks everybody for the good question, but more importantly, thank you to Samantha for introducing all of the work that Diamond Power has been doing to date, and hopefully inspire people to get onto that journey. To your point earlier on, you know, it isn't that complicated on paper. It's when you go and start to go in and integrate it, it can be a bit more complex. But we should all start that journey. There's nothing stopping us developing a roadmap and developing an ambitions. And as I said, usually, you know, like the government is currently using the carrots of investment, funding, support. There's help out there, including ours. But it won't be long that if they don't see what they want to see, they will start using the stick of taxonomy, the stick of, you know, reporting. And what we're trying to do is, how do we help you being ready before it hurts, rather than waiting it hurts to be ready? So thanks again, and hopefully I shall see you all again at our next webinar, as I mentioned, sometime towards the end of August. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks all.